I bet you never asked yourself, how do corals have sex? Well, this episode tells you anyway. But we also discuss something much dirtier. Every summer in Hawaii, on the darkest nights of the month, something extraordinary happens underwater. Millions of coral spawn rise through the blackness. You can smell it before you see it. And that's where today's guest started, making coral babies in a lab on an island called Coconut Island.
There's nothing like seeing millions of things just kind of floating past your eyes.
Andrew Burrows went from studying how reefs are born to fighting something that's killing them, a seaweed called Sargassum, and the numbers are staggering.
There's now roughly like 40 million tons of this algae that are washing up around the region annually.
40 million tons, smothering reefs, shutting down beaches. And it's not just an environmental problem, it's a health crisis.
Pregnant women that live within 2 kilometers of the coast have like a 15% increase of developing preeclampsia. So they can have even birth defects from it.
So what do you do with 40 million tons of a problem that's also home to 215 species? You don't fight nature, you ask nature to do more.
The planet is actually bioengineering itself, like all the time. If we're going to be able to see some substantial change, we have to find ways to elevate nature's ability to handle these problems.
This is Where the Ocean Meets Andrew Burrows. Where the Ocean Meets. Andrew, what did diving with native Hawaiians teach you that no university curriculum ever could?
Wow. Yeah, it taught me a lot about how there's so much more than, I think the books want to tell you, right, about diving and what there is to other things in the environment. So working with native Hawaiians, we, back at my undergraduate lab at the University of Hawaii, the Gates Coral Lab, what we really wanted to focus on is how can we integrate, cultural or indigenous knowledge into the work we are doing in trying to save the reefs. So the native Hawaiians have a term that I can't really remember off the top of my head right now, but essentially it means ancestors. And they have these different spiritual animals that they resemble, and it oftentimes is an ocean organism. And so for many of them, coral is one of those. And so it was really great to, be able to hear from like multiple generations of like how this reef used to be when we'd be diving, or how it's, evolved over the many years, is something that, I wouldn't really get taught in a curriculum course or, just diving recreationally. So
yeah. I think there's so much wisdom in this native knowledge. So it would be fantastic at some point to speak to them as well. But yeah, today we're speaking about something else, and I want to go to your own origins. And basically, if I'm not completely wrong, you studied how coral reproduces, no?
Yeah. So that's where I started out in my research or academic career. So that coral lab at the University of Hawaii, it sits on its own island called Coconut Island, and it's a research hub for anything marine biology. So I think there's, don't quote me on it, maybe like 10 to 12 different labs on the island, all studying different things from sharks to corals to fish, you name it. And so ours was focused on how can we sexually, take the sperm and eggs from corals and fuse them together and make coral babies for restoring our reefs. So that's what our lab focused on, is how to get better methods of collecting those organisms and making more of them to outplant.
The way that I understand it is that there's these mass spawning events. Can you maybe take us underwater for a minute and just explain what happens when coral reproduces?
Yeah, it is really a magical thing. So it's different depending on the different parts of the world you're in, but I'll take you through what it's like in Hawaii. So in Hawaii, the spawning events take place during the summer. So they're known what is like king tides, typically happens from June to August, sometimes September. And for different species, it'll happen actually at different lunar cycles. So for the one that we focused on was called rice coral, or Montipora capitata. that one would spawn during the new moon cycle. And so, we would have this long planning phase beforehand, a couple of weeks out, of all the experiments we're going to do, what the trial actually needs to look like as we go out there to collect the spawn. And then the 3 days leading up to the new moon, including the day of the new moon, we go out every night. And it's actually crazy how specific the time is. It's like around 9 to like 9:11, 9:12 p.m. at night. It happens in this very short window, and often you'll be on the boat kind of driving out to the different reef sites that we'll collect, and there's this smell that you get in the air, and it's a very unique smell. So any other person that's been around spawning will know what I'm talking about. It's very fishy, but it's its own type of like ocean fish smell. And that's what, if you smell that, it's a good sign that that there's spawn happening in the water. And also, before we even kind of jump into like when it really starts to go off and when we're diving, we'll kind of sit around and look at different reefs, and you'll start to see what looks like sand kind of floating up from underneath the water, and then it forms these thick layers on the surface. And so we kind of wait to start to see some remnants of that, because that kind of means that they're primed and probably going to go. And then, we'll throw on our gear, get in there, and oftentimes it depends. If we want to do like wild caught selections, we're not really focused on where we're getting it from. Then we can actually like stay in the boat and just kind of collect off the surface, or collect while we're down in the water. But most times we're trying to choose certain colonies that are more resilient, might be better at withstanding future ocean temperatures, and so we'll put a nice net around them, and it's this kind of contraption that's a net, and then it has a little like collection tube at the top. And because all the bundles, they're called, essentially it's sperm and eggs together, they're positively buoyant, so they start to float up. They'll float directly into that tube. So it is really magical. Like after we get down there and we set the nets around each of the corals that we're looking for, and then we kind of just wait, and we're all like looking at our watches, seeing like, is it time yet? Is it happening? Because sometimes you'll go out there and it might not happen. But when it does, it's really magical, because there's nothing like seeing millions of things just kind of floating past your eyes. And it's dark out too, so you can only really see what you have in your flashlight, but you can kind of just look around, and it just looks like sand and bubbles and things are floating all around you. So it is really magical to see.
So basically it's the sperm and the egg, and then the way how it reproduces is that at some point it falls down and then it decides on where to settle.
Yeah, so naturally how it happens in the wild is they come in these bundles. So it's essentially like a larger form of thousands to even millions of eggs per bundle. And in that bundle, it also has the sperm inside of that same thing. And then it takes about 40 minutes for actual like fertilization to occur. And why they float to the surface is actually so that the wave actions can like break the bundles open. And so after they get broken up, there's the thousands of eggs inside that are much more small, they're microscopic even, but there's a lot more of them that are now fertilized, and then they spread out. And then the idea is that those broadcast spawners, they spawn that way or produce that many organisms because they actually have such a low success rate of them naturally like finding, a spot on the reef. Like if you were to put yourself right now in the shoes of what that cycle looks like, right? Like you have to go up as a bundle, you have to be fertilized correctly, a wave has to kind of break you open. You have to also not get eaten by fish. That's another thing. You're down there and there's a bunch of fish trying to eat all these things. You have to be, not eaten by anything. And then you're going to kind of float around for a little while. Typically, it depends on the species, but it can take actually a couple of days till that fertilized egg changes into a swimming larva. where it actually can, it has mobile ability to, move throughout the water. It's not just floating on the surface anymore. And then it's going to use different sensory mechanisms that it has to find a good place to land. Oftentimes it will look for things in the environment like other coral, or there's different things like crustose coralline algae, it's called. It's like if you ever see a reef and it's like encrusted in this pink and red stuff, that's CCA. They like to settle on that. So yeah, it's a long process and a very hard process for them. So that's why they release millions of these things at a time, because maybe, less than 1% of them actually are going to find a spot on a reef.
Well, do we know what puts them in the moon when there's a new moon? Why then?
Yeah, I think it's still, to my knowledge, I'm not 100% sure. So I'm just going to kind of give what I have, learned or even thought over the times. But I think many different organisms, they just, how, like broadcast spawners in particular, right? They kind of build up that sexual, like their own sexual stock over that year period. And that just happens to be the period that they need to like release it, right? There's no like infinite capacity for them to hold all of that. But I think, there's probably another expert out there that knows more than me about why, like the new moon in particular, or the full moon for other species, has maybe a little bit more pulling power. But, something fun we would do like out as a lab is we'd like grab a speaker and play like Marvin Gaye music and stuff like that, thinking we could, get them more in the mood. But
maybe coral is just very spiritual. And,
yeah.
but we're not here to discuss how corals have sex. We will discuss something slightly dirty, which is sargassum. And what I was wondering is like, what was the moment like when you decided that you want to move from science into building a company?
Yeah. So my journey, I started out in Hawaii, obviously. And what I noticed about the field of academia is that everybody's doing such great research, but there wasn't a ton of people taking that research and like turning it into innovation, or like into like scalable companies that are going to make impact. And so then what often happens is, like, as academics, right, we write like in the discussion section, we hope people will use this, or people are going to use this in future things. And I kind of just had that mentality of like, screw that. Like, I want to, be the one taking those ideas and trying to turn them into something. So I went to grad school here. I'm in San Diego right now. So I went to San Diego State, where I did my master's, and it was actually a little bit away from Sargassum. It was around developing a novel way to sequester carbon in the ocean. So this was through creating like we can get into it later, but it's like a coupled system we called floaters coupled to sinkers, where essentially you could put like baby oysters and clams onto algae, or baby algae together. And then over time, kelp photosynthesizes, and then that oyster gets heavy and can sink that biomass. So at the time when I was finishing up, there was a large demand for like nature-based carbon credits going around. So there's a ton of companies, from like Running Tide to like Planetary, like a lot of these big startups that were happening centered around, nature and how can we, remove carbon at scale. So we wanted to test out that market. Tested it out, and it wasn't super great at the time because it was actually on the downturn of when we were starting to get serious about it. And yeah, that we've kind of done some different pivots since then, and ended up in the sargassum space. So to answer your question more simply, I think it's really just, I wanted to move beyond just doing, research, and really get into how can we, take innovation and make it scale.
Yeah. I think that's fantastic, because we need more people with a scientific background in the field of entrepreneurship. I think this typically yields the best solutions. And before we get super deep into the topic, What is sargassum and why is it a problem?
Yeah. So Sargassum is it's actually a protist. So many people at at a high level, you look at it, it's still macroalgae. But at its at a more granular level, it's a protist. So it's this microorganism that it's been occurring for centuries, and it occurs naturally. So off the west coast of Africa, you actually have Saharan dust that blows into and deposits in the ocean. And in that dust, it's rich with iron, and iron is a big fertilizer of algae. And so you get this large bloom of kind of at its infancy stage that gets this huge like nutrient explosion off the coast. And then the currents take it towards the northeast side of South America and the lower part of the Caribbean, where it gets kind of the second dose of nutrients from Amazon runoff. So there's a ton of agriculture land, and so there's a ton of nitrates and phosphates that get dumped into the ocean right around there. And it's not just the fertilizer that's really making this algae grow, but it's also things like actually there being more CO2 in the atmosphere, because it's an organism that relies on CO2 to grow and multiply. Increasing ocean temperatures increase the rate at which it's growing. And why it's really a problem is there's now, as I mentioned, since 2000, or it's been occurring for centuries. But what often happens is the ocean currents were typically taking it back into the Atlantic, and it was never really washing into the Caribbean or along the American coast. But we're seeing changes in those patterns, and a lot more of it growing off the coast of Brazil that is allowing for more of it to start to deposit into these Caribbean islands. And so there's now roughly like 40 million tons of this algae that are washing up around the region annually. And why it's a problem for coral reefs, if it enters a zone where there's coral reefs, it's essentially like a canopy. So it's blocking a ton of light, a ton of nutrients from actually getting to the coral reef ecosystem. And there's other things like deoxygenation that's happening. For more of the community aspect and why it's a problem is it's washing up on the beaches, and when it decomposes, it smells like rotten eggs. And so that's a huge problem for tourism. And all of those Caribbean islands are huge in tourism. I mean, it makes up, 60% plus of most nations' GDP. And so when you have, tourists going to a beach wanting, a white sandy beach, and they have mounds of this stuff and they can't even like swim in it or breathe around it, it causes a huge problem. So there's tons of other things wrong about it, but.
So it's basically the middle finger of nature for climate change to humanity. Interesting. And basically, my understanding is then if the reef is covered and it can't grow in the way it used to, it harms the fisheries, which harms the income of the people, but also the health of the fish itself. So it's again this ecosystem thought that everything is somehow connected. And you mentioned before that it typically went into the Atlantic. What happened there? Did it just die because the Atlantic is colder, or why wasn't it a problem before?
Yeah, I think it's a game of both volume and like direction. So there wasn't as much volume. So before 2011, the estimated volume of how much biomass there was around maybe like a couple million tons per year. Now, right, shooting drastically up to like 40 million. So there's just a huge difference in that biomass. So there's still a lot of it, floating back out into the Atlantic, but there's just more that's able to really drift into that region. And the second being, it's not that it would necessarily die. It's just that how the Sargasso Sea works is it would, kind of before it hits the Caribbean would start to cycle back, and then it gets caught in these two different gyres. And so because there's these two spinning gyres, it kind of just would move it in a little bit of a circle, and then it would reach the end of its growth season before it would really wash up anywhere. So from about March to October is its like ideal time, or like March is the earliest you'll see it, and then things start to die off around October because, yeah, the water, conditions change. It gets a little bit colder, and there's tons of other, things with like nutrients availability and stuff like that that impact it. But it just kind of lives on this, less than a year growth cycle. So.
When nature rarely produces anything that is unnecessary, what are the benefits of sargassum?
Yeah, so actually, it's this weird dual-edged sword, especially like around the fisheries. Because while it's out there and it's this floating patch, it actually is a very like productive ecosystem. So it's home to like over 215 different species, and tons of fish might use it as essentially like a fish aggregating device where like fish love structure and they love food. And that is kind of the perfect home for them to have structure and food at the same time in the middle of the open ocean. So they might be migrating or moving around. Now here's this, opportunistic patch. The second thing is, right, it is photosynthesizing. So technically it is also pulling carbon out of the atmosphere, which is a good thing, but it really depends where that carbon ends up. So there is a large fraction of it that naturally sinks over time. So I want to say the numbers around 10 to 15% of most of the biomass is able to, sink. And if it sinks deep enough, then any carbon that's in that it like sucked out will, not really resurface from the ocean for hundreds to thousands of years, which is a good thing. What else? Yeah, I mean, mostly just from a biodiversity level as well. Like I mentioned, there's so many species that rely and use it. Sea turtles, actually, when they're migrating, they will rest on it, like during their ocean travels. So it's really important for that as well.
That sounds like an important part of the ecosystem. And coming back to its newly found role as a villain, it's not just a tourism problem the way that I understand, but also there's links to public health crisis. Can you speak a bit more about that?
Yeah. Yeah, so they've done a lot of research on it, right? Anything that washes up and smells like rotten eggs, they're probably going to do some work on it. But from how it's really impacting the human health, they found that swimming in it, you can get some rashes just from having frequent contact with it. But more of the danger is when it's on land and it's decomposing because it's getting into the air. So it releases two compounds. There's hydrogen sulfide and ammonia, and both of those things are not really good for you to breathe. And so you can develop respiratory problems. They've found the workers that are cleaning it up, or people that just live within a coastline of frequent sargassum events, also have an increase in mental health problems. You see there's a ton of schools in the Caribbean that are located near the coast, and they're seeing kids that are in those schools often are getting headaches or have like a reduced ability to focus while they're in class. And then there's even a study on pregnant women that live within 2 kilometers of the coast have like a 15% increase of developing preeclampsia. So they can have even birth defects from it. So yeah, there's a ton of physical and mental health problems associated with this.
So yet another issue caused primarily by climate change, and again hitting the people that did the least to make it a problem. Before we jump into your solution, I also saw that you've been or you went through the NSF I Corps. What is that?
Yeah, so in the States, they have this program for aspiring, entrepreneurs that are coming from the academic field, where, right, as you're aware, and probably other entrepreneurs, there's this important part of your process, which is customer discovery, really figuring out, I have this solution, but will it really fit the problem of what I'm trying to solve? Are there enough, pain points with ideal customers that they would be willing to, buy my solution? So it's a rigorous program that partners you with some experienced advisors and makes you, have to get out there, have interviews with people and, understand their story and their pain points and problems, and also share a little bit about your solution and see how you can, alter your solution to be a little bit more tailored to their problem.
Mhm. And what was the toughest part being part of this program?
Um, I think at the time that was kind of my first introduction as in, like, doing anything entrepreneurship wise, um, and so this kind of is a hard thing just in general. But I think that was the point that made me realize it. Where as an academic, you're kind of taught to be very like stoic and not know everything, and entrepreneurship can almost have like the inverse of like, you have to have this like undoubted conviction and confidence in what you're building. And there's oftentimes, this like not a ton of like humility maybe goes into it. And so I think that was the biggest shock for me, was like, having to have those conversations also with conviction and not just also this lens of like, oh, I could, maybe this whole thing could be wrong, and start to ask the questions an academic would.
Would you recommend the program?
Yeah, I'd recommend the program for sure for academics. I think it is a good testing ground for you to be able to see, like, do you have not what it takes, but the there's a word I'm trying to think of, but yeah, it's a good place to start, is what
Yeah.
I'd say. Yeah.
Okay. And did you go into that program with the idea how it exists today, or was it still more on the carbon sequestration?
Yeah, so it started at the carbon sequestration side of things. So yeah, we were trying to interview people from Apple. A lot of the big purchasers at the time were these large companies like Apple, Microsoft, Shopify. Even like local partners here. We wanted to ask like concrete people, like, hey, are you guys like interested at all in decarbonizing and stuff like that. So that's where it started.
Okay, so let's get into your solution. I think we have a good understanding now why sargassum is a problem and the scale of it. I mean, 40 million tons is drastic. That is insane. Like, moving that away requires basically 1 million trucks, if I'm doing the math right in my head, if you can really load them to the brink. What is your solution?
Yeah. So our solution is that we turn it more into an opportunity while it is out there floating. So if you remember earlier, right, I said that it's actually a very valuable fishery, and fishermen in the Caribbean love to fish around it and use it while it is out there floating. It's just when it floats in that it becomes a huge problem. And so I like to say we're turning lemons into lemonade. Right. And so what we do is we have a two-part system. One is focus on how we can actually help fishermen track where these patches are better in real time. So this is our technology side, where we have a tracker that is able to attach itself within the algae, and then it provides real-time location updates, water clarity, water condition data to the fishermen, and then they have a platform where they can see where these patches are in real time. And then the second part of this is a mix of, we want to build up aquaculture infrastructure throughout the Caribbean. So essentially, a facility where they can make organisms like sea urchins, crabs, oysters that they can sell around the local markets or restaurants. But what we were able to do, and the actual cool solution, is that we were able to take those organisms and we can put them into essentially a food block. So if you've ever had a fish tank, many times you can go and buy like frozen blocks of food, and it has like organisms in it, like plankton and stuff, and you kind of just pop it in to your fish tank. We're taking the same concept just at a larger scale. And the organisms we put in it are going to be things like I mentioned. So Caribbean king crab, oysters, sea urchins, and those organisms, a fraction of them will, if the fishers put them on the blocks or the patches of sargassum, that block will start to dissolve, and then those organisms will begin to swim, and then a fraction of those organisms will attach themselves to the algae, and then they can begin to either eat or sink the sargassum over time. But then the other fraction of it, the fraction, like I mentioned, way back with the coral stuff, it's really hard to attach to things when you're, in the ocean. So those that don't attach will just become food for all the fish in the surrounding ecosystem.
And you yourself have a patent pending for technology. How does that play a role with the sargassum, if at all?
Yeah, so the patent, it covers both the like it's originated in the work from our carbon sequestration model, where we're finding a way, how do we take two organisms to couple onto a similar substrate or a specific thing together that they both like. And the goal there really was like increasing settlement chances of success, and whether that's surviving and growing. And so we took that same principle but put it in the food block of, we need to increase their ability to settle onto this algae, right, to have the increased chances of them sticking and eating and or possibly sinking the sargassum. So what we have in there is essentially different biological molecules, also as mentioned earlier with the coral stuff, where these organisms are looking for certain things. And so we put those different chemical compounds that are natural and found in the environment in that block of food to increase the chances that they can settle, grow, and have impact.
Interesting. I get this funny comment on my videos sometimes. It's like, from more the climate denier perspective, it's like, well, you shouldn't play God with planet Earth and yada, yada, yada. Are you ever afraid that by changing an ecosystem through these actions, you're changing it too drastically in a direction from where it can't recover?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good and fair question, right? To always, see where people are asking or have their concerns. How we've designed it is really not to like introduce anything new, not introduce anything that could be invasive. And ultimately, those organisms are there in our process, but they're at such low concentration. So how I like to think about it is like, maybe there's one urchin or one oyster per sargassum patch. What we're doing is trying to say, what if we made it 100? And by making it 100, we're actually increasing biodiversity because we're adding more organisms. We're improving the chances that we can actually sink some of this before it does some of the harm. And so I really look at it as like, you have to have a responsible lens when you're wanting to get into like bioengineering and working with ecosystems. But at the same time, like the planet is actually bioengineering itself like all the time, right? It's optimizing, it's changing, it's evolving and having organisms do different things, and it's having to kind of roll with the punches. And I think we do too, where if we're going to be able to see some substantial change, we have to find ways to elevate nature's ability to handle these problems.
I agree with it very much. And this brings me to the question of business model. There are so many stakeholders in the system that suffer from sargassum, and at the same time also, I would say the stakeholders that benefit the most from it have no bank accounts because they are the fish, they are the ecosystem, and yet we consume biodiversity as humans, right? It's like there are people that want to eat fish. Who's paying for that?
Yeah. So we've built our business model around actually, how can we sell technology to, other people that have the money and are willing to pay for things that would improve their ability to, let's say, fish, and find a way to like subsidize that cost and make it more affordable, or, you know, be able to just bring that impact to the region. And so that's where, from the fishing technology side of things, that's where our business model is starting, where the goal is to create technology and essentially a fishery or fishing intelligence platform that can give fishers, either from commercial fishing fleets, sports fishers, there's like fad fishers, tuna fishing, you know, companies, give them better technology of saying, hey, you know, we can take satellite data, we have in-water sensors, and so we know what are the, you know, ideal conditions for these types of fish. And so we can create these hot spots on a map, by, you know, these different data layers of satellites and sensors, and say, based on all these factors, these are going to be the best places for you to find these types of fish. And there's already, you know, some companies doing that on a more fragmented level, maybe just selling satellite data of, you know, where is the seawater warm, and then they make assumptions based off that. Or there's some companies just selling, you know, pieces of hardware, and so we're combining that, selling it to people that do have the money, which are these, you know, large scale commercial or, you know, sport fishing groups. And then from that model, we're able to take certain margins from it and then provide the same or similar technology to the local fishers that are there. Yeah, I will say there's like
Intelligence is available for all levels.
Yeah. So the intelligence is available for all levels, and then I think it makes it a lot easier to also, you know, try and work with these governments. So that's kind of the other part of this business model is, they're needing like, and that's where we tie in this aquaculture infrastructure piece of, we want them to look at it as an investment, not of like reducing sargassum, but actually building up, you know, capacity to be able to make organisms for restaurants and other use cases, but we can also use it for tackling the problem. And I think it becomes an easier sell to them. We originally tried approaching them as like, hey, would you pay for something like we can go out and sink some of it beforehand? But there wasn't a ton of interest in that. So that's where we had to, you know, get a little creative.
So, and how do you get the sensors on the Sargassum patch?
Yeah, so the main process is that you have fishers take out, you know, the devices and the blocks of food, and we can tell them based off satellites where these patches are. So if I'm, you know, let's say I'm on the island of Antigua and I'm a fisher and I always go out like 20 to 30 nautical miles upwind, then we can tell them like, hey, here's the coordinates of where these patches are going to be. Then they can go out whenever they find them, then they can throw them in. And the tracker itself, right, if we didn't add anything to it, it would have the chance of kind of breaking apart from the algae and drifting off on its own. But we made it especially so that it can hook and attach to the algae. So the algae has all these different branches, and then the hooks that are on our device essentially keep it locked in with a patch.
Is there anything that you learned from the geospatial data of how these patches move?
Yeah, definitely. There's been people way longer than us like researching it and in this space that we also collaborate with. But yeah, they're like at the University of South Florida is one of the largest groups that is researching this. What we're seeing is that obviously most satellite data, it's the problem or challenge with them is that you have like cloud cover, which can impact your ability to collect data. Additionally, like you don't often have satellites unless you have really fancy ones and that you pay a bunch of money for sitting in one spot, like collecting data all the time. They have to like pass over the earth and they pass in like different bands. And when they do that, there's often like gaps between like one band that they do and the next band that they do. So oftentimes they're really looking for like on the ground validation. And that's what we're also, you know, trying to help provide is like can we have these sensors on like all these patches of sargassum to help kind of fill in that gap between what the sky can't see and what's actually happening. So
more data density. Actually, I need to connect you to Sergey, who was on the podcast before. He's building a nervous system for the ocean. And he's feeding in tons and tons of data into basically an LLM for the ocean to understand better what's happening. Maybe there's a link there.
that'd be great.
Go listen to the episode if you hear this and if you're interested in it. Okay, so understood where the money is coming from, understood how the technology works, understood how everything works. What's the adoption like? Where are you on your entrepreneurial journey?
Yeah, so we're still pretty early in the entrepreneur journey, I would say. So I'm about like a year and a half timeline wise in, and that's through, after taking a couple of different approaches and angles. But this one we have found the most traction with. So I would say about last fall was when we made this decision, and this is where we've started to get a lot more stakeholder buy-in from these different governments in the Caribbean. We've gotten a lot of interest from, global fishing people that are interested in the technology and want to like purchase and pilot it. And I would say kind of our biggest achievements or recent milestones is that there was a call for proposals with the United Nations and the government of Antigua and Barbuda. And we were selected as finalists for that and went out in December to like meet with their prime minister and, tell him about the idea, and he absolutely loved it. And so I, along with like 10 other applicants or finalists, were submitting a final proposal, and that was back at the end of January. So we're a bit on Caribbean time in terms of waiting to hear back, but I think around April time we should hear from that. And then aside from that, we actually got into the Seaworthy Collective Accelerator. So if people aren't super familiar, often in your early stage entrepreneurship journey, you need definitely tons of resources and tons of help, whether that's networking, partnerships, fiscal help to be able to launch your product and your company. And so that's been great. We've been working with them since February, and that was really exciting. And then I just got back last week. I was in Barbados for another incubator where there's 10 of us again getting put through kind of a rapid sprint version of like problem solution orienting what we're trying to do, like what are our gaps we're facing and how do we want to get through it, talking to investors and really understanding like how we can scale this thing, what their interest is from a private like VC level of investment. And then our last day was sort of a pitch day, really getting in there and speaking with, it was like a rapid speed dating session with like 40 people, giving our solution out. So
wonderful. Godspeed to you. And if you succeed, what does the Caribbean look like in, let's say, 10 years?
Yeah, I envision us just being one part of actually a much larger supply chain. So, we haven't talked about it too much, but there's a ton of innovation right now happening around what they call like valorization, or essentially how, once it washes up, what do you do with it, right? And so there's tons of people turning it into like compost. Some people are trying to do like biofuel, cosmetic products and stuff like that, which are all really important. I see us being on like the preventative part of that whole value chain of saying like, what can we do in terms of adding value to it beforehand? And so, in 10 years, I think I see having, Marnova and our operations across at least 10 different Caribbean islands where we have an aquaculture facility making these blocks of food and selling organisms to local markets. I see, fishers heavily involved in not this new style of fishing, but really adopting and integrating our technology, not just because they're able to find and catch more fish, but because they're also able to have some positive climate impact at the same time. And I think in 10 years it'd be cool to claim that you're removing like at least 1 million tons of that algae every year, right? I can be ambitious. This is where like maybe the more entrepreneur people will be like, I'm removing 30 million of those tons every year, but yes, the scientists I'll ground it a little bit.
Yeah. Always underestimate and over deliver, right? On this journey, who would be like your top people that you would love to meet, who could help you?
That's a good question. Top people I'd love to meet that would help me.
Take your time. We can cut out the thinking pause.
Yeah, it's a good question. I've never thought about this. I mean, I think somebody that'd be cool to meet is that I think there's a lot of interesting like philanthropy groups in the Caribbean, and especially like certain celebrities and stuff. Like we know Leonardo DiCaprio has like his own marine research station and island, and he's trying to draw impact. I've always been personally a fan of all of his work and have been inspired by the work outside of his movies that he does around that region. And I know Belize, where he's at, is impacted by Sargassum. So I think that would be just really cool to be able to connect with somebody like him or like a Richard Branson, like those kind of groups that like have the capital and also are in the region. But yeah, other than that, I think it's really a co-building thing. I don't think there's necessarily one role model from the space that I am like I'd love to learn
So
from.
basically the solution is there. What you need now is capital to roll it out.
Yeah.
Oh, wonderful. After all of this, the science, the startup, the Caribbean, what does the ocean mean to you if you compare back when you first went into the ocean in Hawaii?
It's a good question.
Do you see it more as a business, or is it still a place of retreat, or?
Yeah, I see it as still a place of like it being my sanctuary. I grew up actually in Indiana, of all places. So I grew up in the middle of nowhere, United States. And my why and why I really got into this is my dad, wanted to learn to scuba dive when I was 10 years old. I got certified in like a little quarry in Indiana, but then we grew up and I got to dive over the Caribbean and in different countries and got to learn more and more about the world. And not just the world, but also, the underwater world. And so I feel like it's always been my sanctuary to have this place and this thing larger than myself to look out for and see like how can I impact in a better way each year and every day, right? Wake up and say like this is the thing I'm working at. And I think that that sanctity and what it really provides me in terms of like my identity, right? I think we try and give so much to it, but it also gives so much back to us. And so, yeah, in some case, right, I think obviously I have to see it as an opportunity for business, but at the same time, I think I'm always going to have that kind of childhood place for me, right, where it's like my old stomping grounds almost, a place I can really go to feel my why and everything again. So
No. Well, that is beautiful. And I think thanks to your dad for putting you in touch with the ocean, because this is where everything started that you're working on. Thank you for choosing to solve a problem that really affects us all, even though it might happen somewhere on the beach in the Caribbean, but it does affect everybody. And I know that the space where you're providing the service to nature is not the easiest space to be a successful business owner. And even more kudos to you for still trying. I hope Leonardo DiCaprio will call you after this podcast. If anyone knows him, put it in touch, or Mr. Branston himself. And with that, all the very best to you, Andrew.
Thank you,
And
Joel. Yeah.
let's check in 1-2 years time and see where you stand.
Yeah, that'd be great. And yeah, it's been a pleasure. So thank you for, bringing me on and the opportunity, and everybody else for listening. So
Perfect. Where's the best place to follow your work?
best place would probably be our website. So www.marnova.co. We're starting to get, set up a team to start doing the newsletters and stuff like that for any updates. And then just, us personally on LinkedIn. So you can go to our Marnova page on LinkedIn, or follow me on my LinkedIn, and I often post stuff there. So
Perfect. Thank you so much.
yeah,
Talk to you soon.
thanks, Joel.
If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe to our YouTube and our Instagram.
Where the ocean meets